I don't think that the whole nation supports the invasion. That's something that President Putin wants everyone to believe, and I think that's not true. But yes, he is trying to use Russian history as a justification of this brutal aggression. There is a huge debate now between Russian society and Ukrainian society, and a lot of Ukrainians are blaming not only Russian government, not only Vladimir Putin, but Russians and Russian culture as such for being imperialist and for oppressing Ukraine for so many years. And I think that we need to admit that, and only after we take the blame, only after we take all the responsibility of Russian culture and Russian history, we will have the opportunity to move on. We need to revise and reconsider all our previous approach to Russian literature, to Russian history. And actually, there is the fact that we don't have proper history of Russia. We have imperialist narrative that has been created for many years, and actually most Russian classical historians used to work as propagandists. They were always trying to prove the fact that the empire is the biggest value. So I think
yeah.
I'm sorry. My mission when I was writing this book was basically to start from the scratch, to start writing another completely new anti-imperialist version of Russian history.
So, I mean, history is famously told by the victorious. How does your version of Russian history?
That's the wrong approach. Yeah,
Yes,
that's the wrong
but it's
approach.
a fact, and it doesn't just relate to Russia, does it? You know, I mean, as a woman,
Absolutely.
there are huge gaps in history for my own sex, for example. So, history being used as a propaganda tool is nothing new. Perhaps it's just exaggerated by something like 50 years of communist rule, or how is it how does it play out differently for Russia, and what is the real narrative in comparison to the narrative that you've been brought up on as a Russian?
Yeah, during the last 4 centuries, all works written about Russian history were very Moscow centered. They completely ignored people who lived outside of Moscow, in Ukraine or in Siberia or in other Russian regions. They all those stories completely ignored ordinary people. They were always focused on the emperors or secretary generals of the Communist Party or presidents. So they were not about the people, and I think that's here is the time to fix it, because we used to agree with the fact that only victors have that privilege to write history, but that's wrong. That's not the way how our history should like in the 21st century. We should acknowledge the fact that suppressed, that defeated, also have a right to have their own history, because
How does how
not all of us are sons and grandsons of presidents and kings. We have to know the history of our predecessors as well.
And if you look at Russian history, how would you describe how it informs Russian people's sense of themselves today? How does Russian history, the history that has been taught, create the environment in which, a whole nation can support, for example, the invasion of Ukraine?
I don't think that the whole nation supports the invasion. That's something that President Putin wants everyone to believe, and I think that's not true. But yes, he is trying to use Russian history as a justification of this brutal aggression, and he is using historical myths. And actually, that's the main idea of my book, that there are certain historical myths, for example, that Russians and Ukrainians are the same people and there is no difference between them, and there is no such thing as Ukrainian language, and it's just wrong Russian. But all those myths should be debunked. And yes, President Putin is obsessed with history, and he is using history as very effective tool of his propaganda. And sometimes when it comes to history, a lot of people buy it. So he doesn't pretend that his war is not aggressive invasion. Yeah. And a lot of people agree with that, but at the same time, as they are listening to the propaganda, they start believing that, for example, for many centuries, Russia was doomed to have a cultural and civilization war against the West, and Ukrainians betrayed Russians, and that's why they should be punished. That sounds very, I would say, irrational. But a lot of people start believing that because they're listening to that kind of propaganda.
Last night I went to see a play called Patriots, written by Peter Morgan, which is about, I suppose, the rise of Putin and the rise of the oligarchs in Russia through the 90s, and it focuses very much on characters like Boris Berezovsky and Roman Abramovich.
Yeah, I saw it a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, I know what you are talking about.
So what I was wondering was, I mean, you in some ways you are in the same position. You're not an oligarch, obviously, or not that we know about, but you're in the same position as Berezovsky in terms of, he went up against Putin, and he really lost that fight, didn't he? In many ways, whether it was from a financial point of view or indeed, in terms of his own mental health and so on. You've also had to leave Russia. You've been named a foreign agent. Continuing to speak out is dangerous. How does that impact on your life? And what are your feelings about Putin and the Russia he's created in your lifetime?
I respect Peter Morgan, and he's a brilliant writer, but I do not agree that the biggest problem for Boris Berezovsky was the fact that he left Russia. Actually, he lost in court, and that was the key problem for him, and his life was ruined after that, after he lost that case against Abramovich in British court. So I would not compare myself to Berezovsky. I do not consider myself to be a person defeated by Putin. That was my choice to leave Russia, because I could not remain in the country when it has become fascist regime that started an aggressive invasion of Ukraine.